Welcome to another episode of Football Insiders. Jason Andera, Midco Sports, alongside Michael McCleary from the Argus Leader, and our great intro music continues to just thrill people, and it gets people excited just like it does with me every week.
Top of the iTunes charts, I heard.
Yeah, it's done really well.
I don't know if anybody downloads music on iTunes anymore, but
I do. Yeah,
Football Insiders.
Football Insiders do. But we just came off of one of the most exciting weeks we've had in high school football in a long time, and we're going to start there, kind of looking back at last week before we dive into this week. And I guess the reaction we'll start with is the game that we were at, Pierre at Brandon Valley. Interesting game, first of all. Pierre gets down 3 touchdowns, and then they come back and find a way to get it done. What were just your gut reactions from that Pierre-Brandon Valley game?
Yeah, I thought in the first half that Brandon Valley was going to run away with it. And, you know, to be honest, like, I came away feeling good about both teams, sort of. Because we knew Pierre was good, and, you know, I almost feel like Brandon Valley, we sort of discussed it last week, came in as a little bit of the underdog there, where, you know, they were having a nice little streak, but, you know, Pierre's been dominant all season long. And even though the class difference, like, you would expect Pierre to come in and take care of business. But, you know, Brandon Valley really showed things on offense that we didn't see from them early in the season. So I was impressed by them, and that comeback was great there.
It was a lot of fun. Pierre ended up with a 2-score victory because they went for 2 to put it out of reach at the end of the game. But let me tell you, this game seemed a lot different to me because it started out with 2 turnovers, 2 really unlikely turnovers. One was an interception of Lincoln Keenholtz. He hasn't been picked off. He's only been picked off one other time this year, I think. So that was something that Brandon Valley turned into a big play for a touchdown. And then there was kind of a freak fumble that happened. Brandon Valley turned that into a touchdown on the next drive. And then Pierre came back and had a long touchdown called back for an illegal man downfield. They've had several penalties that game, so they got off to a terrible start and still found a way to win. I guess the one thing that maybe concerned me a little bit with Pierre watching them was their defense. Like, Brandon Valley didn't have a lot of problems all night. Didn't have to punt. They didn't have to punt a lot, and were able to move the ball pretty easily on Pierre. Is that an issue you think going forward?
I mean, it's something you definitely need to keep an eye on. You actually said on the sideline of the game, you know, there hadn't been any stops other than the turnovers. Nobody stopped anybody. So
until the fourth quarter.
Exactly, yeah. And then Pierre started to, you know, once you get in that big of an offensive rhythm, it's easy to sort of like play off the momentum there.
Yeah.
You know, also playing with the lead, I'm sure Brandon Valley was doing some desperation things, that type of things. Yeah, I mean, you know, Brandon Valley, their offense definitely looks better.
Right.
But at the same time, Pierre did give them a ton of openings. You know, Pierre's defensive line did show some promise, which, you know, makes me think that potentially, you know, those are just things that they need to correct in the secondary, and, you know, that's something that towards the end of the year they'll be better. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I want to give credit to Lucas Slack. He's continued to get better and better throughout the year, and Dylan Langrock has turned into one of the best weapons at receiver. Even without Nate Andreessen, their leading receiver, who had, I think, separated his shoulder during the game, wasn't able to continue to play. Dylan Langrock came up with over 200 yards receiving. So, yeah, I'm with you. I saw a lot of positives on both sides of the ball. But it begs the question, and I've gotten this question several times, is how would Pierre do if they were in AAA? So let's clear the field of all classes. Who are the best teams in South Dakota? You wrote about this a little bit with 11AA having some really good teams this year.
Yeah, and I always, on things like this, I say they might be the best team. Because, you know, you never know. But, you know, right now, if I had to rank just all the teams in the state, I'd probably stick to just AAA, AA for now. It's a little bit harder to guess because you don't really get those cross-class matchups when you get down to, you know, 11 AAA
Winter
versus
West
11.
Central,
yeah, exactly. But you know, I would think that Jefferson still holds that top spot. Harrisburg, you know, obviously seems to be distant from Jefferson, especially based on that Week 1 matchup. But they have won 5 weeks in a row, so you never know.
They're a different team now.
How much better they are. So I'd still give both of those teams the benefit of the doubt. But you know, I'm willing to, based on some of the matchups where we have O'Gorman and Brandon Valley coming next. Both those teams lost to the top 2 teams in AA. So I would give them those 3 and 4 spots if I had to rank all those teams today.
Yeah, and I I think I've heard some people say Pierre's the best team regardless of class. I think watching them play against Brandon, they did look much better than Brandon. But remember, Brandon's not the same team as Jefferson. And I think this Jefferson team, what they showed last week, they are the best team in the state. They have so few weaknesses. I've got Jefferson, then I got Pierre, and then I got TE and Harrisburg are very close. I don't know how that would go right now. And of course, I don't have to make these rankings, so I'm not going to. But they're in the same area, same ballpark. And then you got Brandon and O'Gorman, and then Lincoln probably a step back after that. But Yankton probably, we're going to find out a little bit about Yankton too as they play Roosevelt this week to see maybe if they belong in a overall state top 5. But anyway, always fun to talk about. Would like to hear what you guys think about that. Reaction from last week's 1 versus 2 games. We had a pair of 1 versus 2 games. And speaking of Jefferson, they came out and showed people what's up, and especially on defense with 2 defensive touchdowns, holding a team that averaged 48 points per game coming in to a measly 17, and most of those coming late in the game.
Yeah, I showed up about midway through the first quarter, just sort of watch a little bit of the game because I was intrigued by the matchup. And by the time I walked in, Nelson Wright had scored a touchdown off of about a 10-yard punt by O'Gorman that just sort of led to an easy touchdown by Jefferson. But they were just causing so much pressure. You couldn't even blame O'Gorman for some of the mistakes that they made because Jefferson on both sides of the ball is just so mature. Obviously they got a ton of seniors on both sides, and they're just so talented, so good, and they're showing it against every single team that they play this year. Even O'Gorman, which we thought were right there with them.
Yeah, and O'Gorman came down first drive, had their best drive of the game right off the bat, and then after that, the Jefferson defense took over. And they haven't been super opportunistic on turnovers and takeaways this year, but they were in this game, and they got after Bennett Dannenbring. Held the rushing game to just right around 100 yards and the passing game under 200 yards, so a huge win for them. And I just got to say, Deshaun Rolick, he's just a junior for Jefferson. He really showed up. Dawson Sexer has been really good for them as well. And Thomas Heiberger, they've just had a lot of guys impress me on defense. I knew they were good on offense, but boy, these defensive players have really stepped up for Jefferson, and they looked fantastic. So yeah, they make a statement there, getting that number 1 spot. And then the other 1 versus 2 game we had was Bridgewater Emory Ethan and Winner, and we talked about it last week. If Bridgewater Emory Ethan had any claim to stay at number 2, and there was a little difference in that game.
Yeah, Winner, as they've done with pretty much everybody this year, took care of business. I think it was 36-0, the final score. We probably knew a little bit that Winner was better. That they had some distance between them and number 2, but at the same time, you hope that Bridgewater Emory Ethan can put some points on the board, make the game a little bit competitive. But Winner kind of ran away with it, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, they just took the ball and hid. They didn't do anything spectacular, but Blake Vollmer had a good game for them at quarterback, and they ran the ball as they always do, sharing it amongst Aiden Barfus and Riley Orrell and the rest of the crew. So big win for Winner as they continue this 3-game gauntlet of playing undefeated teams, and we'll get more into that as we go through the classes. Let's start in 11 AAA as Jefferson stays at number 1. Harrisburg moves up to that number 2 spot. Brandon Valley stays at 4 with their close game with Pierre, and Lincoln wins in overtime against Stevens. They were up 31-10 in this game. Stevens came back, tied it, went to overtime, but in the process, Lincoln had a couple of record-setting performances. They've shown that they can put up some big numbers.
Yeah, and I wrote about this in my weekly column too. I mean, you've been around a lot longer than I have watching football in this state, but and just looking at the numbers with Jack Smith, I don't know if we'll ever see a performance like that ever again.
It was the most catches I've ever. I think it officially went down as a 20-catch day.
Okay.
It was 21 originally, but I looked at the record books and it came in at 20. So, but still 20 catches. And you go back and watch the actual catches that he made. I went back and watched and saw, well, what were they doing? Just little screen passes or what? There were some highly contested, highly skilled catches made in that game by Jack Smith. He was phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that this was done in AAA, obviously. And Rapid City Stevens also isn't a team that gives up 377 yards to a single receiver. That's
Right.
that's like
yeah.
that's not.
They've had their issues at times, but they're a respectable team for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My point more being the 377 is just a number that
ridiculous.
It's unfathomable. And I sort of wrote in the Argus that if he came away from this performance with, say, 10 catches for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns, we'd say, wow, that's an unbelievable performance by Jack Smith. Double it.
If you double it, that's what he did. It was crazy. One of the more special games, and those two are both juniors, Tate Schaefer and Jack Smith, so they're going to keep getting better. The games this week to look at in 11 AAA, a number 1 Jefferson goes to Stevens this week to test what they can do out west. We've got Lincoln taking on Brandon. Lincoln is at homecoming, so that'll be probably the most highly contested game of the week. Washington takes on O'Gorman. Both those two teams coming off of losses, of course, trying to get things set straight. And Rapid City Central takes on Harrisburg. And Roosevelt will be playing against Yankton on Saturday. So that's a look at 11 AAA. 11 AA this week. Not a lot of great matchups, really, as far as rankings go. Pierre at Huron. Spearfish takes on T-Area. Yankton has that Roosevelt game. That might be the most interesting game in the class. And then Brookings takes on Aberdeen Central. This is the one with 2 teams that are in the rankings. Any comments on 11 AA, Michael?
No, I mean, just waiting for week 9, Pierre T. That's going to be a really fun one. So, I feel like last week was a big week for AA with Pierre getting that win over a AAA team a couple weeks after O'Gorman. T got theirs over O'Gorman. So, now we wait for the 2 top teams to match up.
Just a little note, Lincoln Keenholz is less than 50 yards away, passing yards, from becoming the all-time 11-man leader in career yards. So good luck to Lincoln Keenholz. And we didn't even mention his numbers, how ridiculous they were last week, throwing for over 200 yards and almost rushing for 200, throwing for over 300 and almost rushing for 200 against a AAA team. So shout out to him as well. 11A, we've got West Central Del Rapids still undefeated, kind of on a collision course to the Dome, it looks like at this point, because they're not going to see each other until then, if that does play out that way. Dakota Valley moves up to number 3 in the rankings. Beersford, with a loss to Del Rapids, swaps places with them, and Canton, who was tied for 5th, moves to receiving votes after losing yet another game. But the one everybody's kind of looking forward to is number 1 versus number 1. West Central takes on Winter. This will be the best test, I think, for both of these two teams coming up in the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, this might be one of the better tests that Winter's gotten in a couple of years now.
It really is.
Because West Central has, we've talked about it, how close Del Rapids and West Central are, and Del Rapids keeps on proving it too.
Yeah.
But West Central, every single test that they've gotten, they've passed. So passed and then some. They're kind of acing some tests too.
They've gotten better. It feels like, yeah.
Oh, 100%. On the defensive end, on the offensive side, they just seem like they're clicking. And same thing with Del Rapids. But there's no reason to push West Central off that top spot, even as good as Del Rapids been. But Winter, with the separation that they have at 11B, like, perhaps that has some staying power in 11A's class, because obviously you gotta beat the top team, but you never know, like, with that separation they have, how much that means.
It'll be really interesting to see the difference there, because Winter hasn't seen, I don't think, the size that West Central is going to bring, and West Central does make some mistakes, though. They will turn the ball over from time to time. I think if Winter can win that turnover battle, they can get around some of the other issues that they're going to have, skill-wise and size-wise against West Central. So I think that could even the playing field. If West Central takes care of the ball, I think they're the better team, but we'll see.
And I think the battle up front is probably the biggest battle of the game. I mean, like you said, it's the size with West Central and
not that Winter's small, but West Central's big.
Right, and West Central by Class 11A standards is big.
Yeah.
I think that's something that if West Central can win at the line of scrimmage in a way that nobody has been able to beat Winter at the line of scrimmage this year, or even the past couple years, that's something that would probably be the key to them holding off their 11B opponent.
It'll be fun to see. The other fun game in 11A we want to talk about, Beersford at Sioux Falls Christian. A couple of ranked teams going at it here in Sioux Falls. A big test for both of those two teams.
Yeah. Beersford picked up a loss for the first time in a couple weeks. Beersford was on a run, and Sioux Falls Christian has been dominating since that 0-2 start. So I'm really excited to see these two 4-2 teams sort of coming from different trajectories a little bit. See how they do. See who's legit at this point of the season.
I think with such competition at the top of 11A, with Del Rapids and West Central as good as they've been, I think a win in this game is going to go a long way to see if they can find a way to be a title contender. It'll be a great test for both of those two teams. 11B, we already talked about West Central at winner as maybe the game to watch. As far as other ranked battles, nothing else going on, but you see Elk Point Jefferson finally gets that number 2 spot in the rankings, and they'll take on Tri-Valley to try to hold on to that spot as they're putting together just a record-setting season, defensively especially. Roncalli continues to win, and they stay undefeated at 6-0. They get Webster with an impressive win last week against St. Thomas More, so that kind of knocks St. Thomas More out of the receiving votes category. But no other ranked teams to really talk about in 11B as far as matchups go. And in 9-man football, the number ones, we got a new number 1 in 9A, Warner. They only scored 1 touchdown but found a way to win. Huge defensive performance for Warner to get it done last week and to vault to number 1. Gregory took a loss last week on a crazy game against Parkston. So Parkston still just a 1-loss team in 9AA. Gregory now a 1-loss team in 9A. Warner, the only undefeated team in 9A, move up to number 1. So we had a few crazy things going on in 9-man football last week. Any observations on the entire 9-man classes from you, Michael?
Well, I thought it was really interesting because last year it was pretty easy to tell that 9A was sort of, I guess, the dominant class in 9-man football.
And then everybody went up or down.
And with all the realignments, I thought that Parkston game, that Parkston went over Gregory, obviously 9A's number 1, that was a good game for 9-man football.
Yeah.
Where it sort of showed that, all right, 9AA, the classification that's supposed to be, I guess, the most enrollment, most players available. They're actually establishing themselves as one of the better classes in 9-man.
But then Warner comes in and takes out Hamlin, an undefeated 9AA team, and you're like, well,
yeah. It's sort of an example of the parity that you
Right.
have all across 9-man football, and I think that's really exciting because even if you look down at 9B, like Harriet-Selby area, they're coming down from 9A, and they're returning a lot of their players that got to the 9A championship last year too. So
guys, yep.
That's it's sort of an exciting season for 9-man football with how everybody's sort of coming into their new classes and how they're performing and stuff like that. A lot of repeat top performers, but at the same time, you got some teams that are really showing out this year.
Yeah, just a couple notes on that. We already mentioned Warner going up to that number 1 spot with their 8-6 win over Hamlin, but Brendan Begeman, you mentioned from Harriet-Selby, joined the 5,000-yard club, so he's in the top 13 now. He could maybe get to 6,000, depending on how much he gets to play with these games. Sometimes they get blowouts, and he has to get pulled, or they don't even play a second half. But he's having a phenomenal season, so something to watch out. And then another thing to note is Avon has Brady Bierma back, who was one of the guys who was one of the best players last year, coming off an ACL injury, and they're a much better team. They knocked off Alcester Hudson last week, an undefeated team. So I think Avon gets back into the conversation in 9B this week as one of those teams to maybe watch as we go forward, because 9B, really it's been Harriet-Selby area and Hitchcock-Tulare, but maybe Avon finds their way back in. And then DeSmet has a chance to make some noise this week too as they take on Hitchcock-Tulare. That could be one of the fun games to watch in 9-man football. And speaking of fun games to watch, Bonham takes on Parkston, and Bonham still just 1 loss on the year for them too, and they kind of got knocked out of the rankings because of that loss. But a win over Parkston shows that maybe they belong in the conversation as well for 9AA. So a lot of fun stuff to watch this week on football. What are you going to be covering this week for the Argus Leader?
I'm going to be going out to Sioux Falls Christian to watch the Beersford game. So that's going to be a really fun one. I'm excited for that.
That could be one of the best in the state as far as just equal. And as far as the game going down to the fourth quarter, I really think that could be a lot of fun. I'm going to be out at McEnany Field at O'Gorman for our live game between Washington and O'Gorman. So we'll be bringing that to you at 6 o'clock on Midco Sports and Midco Sports Plus. Make sure to check that out. And we'll wrap up everything from across the state of South Dakota on Varsity Sports Live at 10:30 as usual. Anything else we missed, Michael?
I don't think so.
I think we got you covered for another week of football. And for Football Insiders, I'm Jason Andera. This is Michael McCleary. We'll see you next week.